Could you tell us a little bit about some of the principles that you think have the greatest potential to apply in this field that maybe people haven't yet done or maybe you've experimented with?
So the first observation I want to make is I want us to think for a second about the gap or the range between the minimum amount that we have to do to keep our jobs so that nobody fires us and the max we could do if we really care. And let's call that goodwill. And I think it's quite clear that goodwill is increasing, right? If we worked in a manual labor job and we had to rearrange the chairs here or take them out, what's the range between the minimum we have to do and the max we could do? As we move to the information age, and we can sit at our desk and play with Twitter, or we could be at home and work, and we can represent ourselves to other people by thinking about our job. And this gap is incredible. This range is incredible. And it's only growing. It's only growing. And we're really lucky and fortunate. Not everybody in the world has that. But a lot of the things we think about, this range is large, incredible, and increasing. And it's all up to us to either not shrink it or hopefully increase it. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want us to think about is this phrase that we have the right to pursue happiness. And I actually think it's a shame that we wrote it in. I mean, that it's written in there. Because I think happiness is the wrong goal for humanity. Now, I'm not against happiness, but if you think about momentary happiness and you say life is about sitting on the beach drinking mojito, it's kind of nice for a few days a year. But you don't want the life of that. And if you think about the things that actually make us fulfilled, most of them don't have happiness in them. I'm trying to be sad again. But anybody here ever ran a marathon? A few? Okay, I never did, but I watched some people who ran marathons.
While drinking margaritas on a beach.
They don't seem happy. They don't seem happy. Right? If you came from outer space and you saw people who are running marathons, you would say, these people did something terrible. They did something terrible and now society is punishing them in this really cruel way. They're experiencing lots of pain, lots of misery. Hopefully they'll forgive them and they'll never behave badly again. Because it is more painful. Like, there's no question that being in jail, like if you took people and you say which one is more painful, like, it's just terrible. Now, of course, it's not the whole picture, because even though it's physically terrible, it gives people lots of other things. Like, nobody smiles, but it gives people a sense of purpose and meaning and competition and camaraderie and history to 2,000 years back of when people started running this particular distance. It's really an amazingly meaningful experience, just not about happiness. And I think that a lot of the things that we are trying to optimize in our own lives, or also the life of companies, are misguided toward happiness rather than to meaning. And I think that a lot of times we're actually sacrificing meaning for cheap happiness rather than doing something. And as we move more to the information age, we can do more of that. And I'll tell you about maybe the most recent data exercise we had with this. What I do is I usually go to one company and I change something. I change bonuses or structure or something, and we see some improvement. What is really hard is to see whether the stock performance of that company is influenced by that. If you go to one company at a time, lots of things happen. How can you find out? So for the last few years, I've been really interested in trying to get data about the productivity of companies. So I finally got a data set. Took a long time. And the data set describes hundreds of companies going back to 2006. And basically twice a year, I have a snapshot of almost 100 dimensions of human capital. And you can think about whether the company gives free coffee or not, and whether the salaries are equal between men and women, and what is the vacation policy, and do people feel that they have a sense of meaning, and do people have an autonomy, and lots of things, right? Almost 101 of those. And I took each of them separately. I said, imagine we took just one. Does the company give free coffee? Not that one, but just imagine. And I said, imagine I got the first data about the quality of coffee that the company has. I got the first data set in 2006. And I saw to the companies, from the company who buy the worst coffee to the company who buy the nicest coffee. And I bought in the stock market the stocks of the companies in the top 20%. And I kept those stocks, invested. And then at some point I got new data. And some companies popped to the top 20 and some companies drop. And if they did, I replaced the stocks. And I kept on doing this until the end of 2017. From all these 100 dimensions, all but one beats the S&P 500. Some of them beat it by a little bit, some of them beat it a lot, and even the one that is a little bit behind is just a tiny bit behind. Now, just to be clear, that means that every way I could come to measure employees' well-being is as good or better than the S&P 500. And this index, by the way, doesn't use any financial data. I don't look at anything about quarterly earnings. I only look at companies who treat their employees well on coffee, quality of salary, sense of meaning, and so on. And of course, now we next exercise, right? This is just to tell you that all the building blocks I have are better than the S&P. And now we said, okay, let's build a really good index. So we played for a while and we tried to build a good index. And our good index that we came up with does 12% better than the S&P per year. Now, if you're not in the stock market, 12% is a lot. It's really tough to beat those indices, and 12% per year is a lot. And by the way, it's not just on the top side, it's also on the bottom side. So everything I told you now is just about the companies who treat their employees well. What are companies who treat their employees badly? That's a really good reason to short them. And if you short those companies, you're really doing well as well. So it's not just on the upside, it's on the downside as well. And now you can ask the question, okay, so what things enter these dimensions and what doesn't? So it turns out that quality of coffee doesn't matter. Actually, it turns out that benefits in general don't matter as much. And the things that matter are the things you would think matter from the beginning of the discussion. It's a sense of purpose and autonomy. And a lot of it is about alignment. So for example, if you have a company and you have the management and you have the employees, and you try to make the average happy by making the management happier, that's actually a good reason to short the stock. Because it's not just about the average happiness, it's about the agreement between employees and management. And as this gap becomes larger, it becomes a worse and worse signal. And this is, of course, because our happiness is about relativity, not about absolute. So if you look at the people around you, and some people are treated much better, then you think really miserable. It's not about the absolute level. There's all kinds of things like that. I'll tell you just one last thing about this. There's a lot of movement now to take women and put them at the top of the organization. There's even a she index that invests in companies that do that. It turns out by itself it's a terrible strategy. If you basically, we call it window dressing. If you basically have a culture that is very unequal to women, and you take and you put a couple of people on the board and maybe somebody at the C-suite, performance of the company actually goes down. Now, if you change the culture of the company, now you're doing well. So it's not that putting women at the top is not a good idea, but it's a really bad idea if it doesn't come together with a real cultural change. So I think for me, the question about how do we, the thing is, if you just arrange tables or chairs, there's not so much of yourself that you can bring to work. The amazing thing about the modern workplace is we can bring lots of motivations in. We can bring identity, and we can bring a sense of accomplishment, and we can bring pride. There's all kinds of things because people can do it. And I think the companies who do it well are going to flourish dramatically, and the companies who don't and have this mechanical view of labor are the ones we should short.